Hello, welcome everyone. This is NTAA's first webinar call in the Carbon Rule series we're presenting to talk about EPA's proposed Clean Power Plan. Before we get started, I'd like to remind folks that you can type in your questions in the chat box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And at this point, I'll just turn it over to Christina, who will be your moderator for today's call. Thanks everyone for joining, and by the way, this is Andy Besser. I'm Project Director for National Tribal Air Association. So thanks for being on the call.
All right, so thank you all, as Andy said, for joining today. We are pleased to be joined also by two colleagues from OAQPS, and I'm just going to provide a brief introduction. All of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Laura McKelvey. I want to introduce also Amy Vasu, who is another OAQPS colleague. So Amy was the project manager for the development of the Clean Power Plant Rule proposal, and her job was to coordinate the agency's activities between all of the different OAR offices across the agency, which sounds like quite the task. Again, many of you already know Laura McKelvey, but Laura is the manager for the Community and Tribal Programs Group and has worked to ensure that the outreach and consultation on this proposal are effective in getting input from tribes on the rule. On a more personal note, the two, both Laura McKelvey and Amy Vasu, went to graduate school together and have known and worked with each other for around 25 years. So again, we look forward to hearing their presentation today, and we'd strongly encourage questions. If folks have questions, please, as Andy mentioned, type them into the question box. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Laura.
Okay, well, I think Amy is going to walk through the presentation. I think, and as Christina said, you know, if you've got questions, type them in the box, and we'll answer them after we do the polling questions. We're going to go through polling questions interspersed in the presentation. So if that's okay with folks, we'll wait after the polling questions, and then we'll answer any questions that have come in the meantime. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and she's going to go through the presentation, and then we hope to have a good dialogue at the end of the conversation with you all.
Thanks, Laura. This is Amy. I will start with slide 2. What I'd like to talk with you about is I'll cover what we did, what we proposed for the Clean Power Plan, the proposal that went out in June. Some of the why we're proposing that rulemaking, what we know about the potentially affected power plants that are located in Indian country, what we've specifically asked for comments related to areas of Indian country and any implications for tribes, what we're currently working on, which is a supplemental proposal, and what that would mean for you all, and questions we have and requests we've made regarding that and in this consultation too, and then how we determine the best system of emission reduction in the proposal and what that might mean for how we could look at it for areas of Indian country, and then other questions for your consideration. So on slide 3, just as some background on the Clean Power Plan proposal, the administrator signed that rulemaking on June 2nd, and we were able to have it published in the Federal Register on June 18th. So now that it's been published, we have had, we just had public hearings last week in 4 different locations. We have requested comments, and we have a 120-day comment period for that proposal. What that proposal is a little different from some of our rulemakings. We're not setting standards or emission limits. What we're doing is proposing guidelines for states to use to follow in developing state implementation plans to address greenhouse gas emissions, and the rule is specifically for existing fossil fuel fired electric generating units or power plants. So this would apply to certain coal-fired power plants and gas-fired and oil-fired power plants potentially. what we proposed in the rulemaking is state-specific rate-based goals for carbon dioxide emissions. So we focused just on carbon dioxide as that particular greenhouse gas in setting goals for states to reach by, we proposed by the year 2030. And these, and we also established guidelines or proposed guidelines for states to follow in developing their plans to achieve the goals. We also, in that rulemaking, did identify the 4 affected EGUs that we were able to, that are located in Indian country. We did not go any further than that. We identified the facilities. We did not propose goals for areas of Indian country in this proposal in June. We do, in the proposal though, we explained that we intended to publish a supplemental proposal. We are planning to do that in the near term. And in that proposal, we plan to propose goals for those 4 affected power plants that are located in Indian country, as well as any others we identified during this process. And then, of course, we would see comment on how, in addition, we would be seeking comment on how tribes with either renewable energy programs and or demand-side energy efficiency programs could be included in plans even if they don't have affected power plants. So I'm going to say that one more time because that's a little complicated sounding. There are some tribes that expressed interest in participating in state implementation plans such that states would benefit and the tribes would also benefit if, for example, a tribe has a renewable energy project or program. I'll stop there for polling questions and any other questions.
Right.
Christina, did you want to go through your polling questions now?
Yes. So we're going to go ahead and launch the first poll. And for this question, we're inquiring whether or not you believe that this particular poll, this particular rule will impact tribes. So if you could go ahead and select one of the options listed. And do know that this is totally anonymous. There's actually no way to track anyone's responses. It's more just to help get the conversation going among the group. So I'm going to leave it open for a couple more seconds. If you haven't voted, please take a moment to vote. And again, feel free to be candid because this is totally anonymous. So based on that question, it looks as though 42% believe that yes, the rule may have impacts for tribes, and 26% yes for the better, and 32% rather, explained that they are unsure as to whether or not the rule will affect tribes. So with that, we'll go ahead and open up the second polling question. Have you or your tribe ever submitted comments to EPA on a proposed rule? And as I mentioned before, this is all anonymous, so it's more to sort of get the dialogue going and frankly find out how NTAA, how we can be more helpful and what it is that we can do to support your needs in whatever way possible. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So in response to that question, it looks like 61% said yes, which is excellent. 17% no, not to worry. There are plenty of rules yet to comment on, including this one. And 22% said unsure. And with that, we'll go ahead and return back to the presentation.
Hey, Christina, it looks like Charlie Lippert might have had a question, but I can't find it on the list of questions.
Okay. It looks like Charlie said, I don't see who all is in attendance.
Sorry, Christina, this is Andy. I did just change the settings, so hopefully folks can see it now. I did see Kevin Greenleaf can see them. So hopefully folks can see the attendees now.
Okay, so this is Amy on slide 4. It's important that we explain why this rulemaking is important, and we do that in the proposal. We explain that carbon dioxide is a potent greenhouse gas and that contributes to climate change. And as many of you know, the science has gotten extremely strong and stronger based on recent reports. Carbon dioxide is the primary greenhouse gas pollutant, and it accounts for nearly 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions and 82% of the greenhouse gas emissions across our country.
So, Christina, I don't think that the PowerPoint is back up. I think we still have the polling questions back up.
Thank you, Laura. There we go. Are you seeing it now?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
As many of you know, greenhouse gas pollution causes significant impacts, potentially rapid, damaging, and long-lasting changes in our climate that can have a range of severe negative effects on human health and the environment. We document many of those effects and summarize them in the proposal. We also identify the May 2014 report of the National Climate Assessment, and that concluded that climate change impacts are already manifesting themselves and imposing losses and costs. The report documents increases in extreme weather and climate events in recent decades, damage and disruption to infrastructure and agriculture, and projects and projects continued increases in impacts across a wide range of communities, sectors, and ecosystems. And again, we go into more details in the proposal about that as an explanation for the rationale for why we would propose this rulemaking. Again, as I mentioned, by the year 2030, based on the proposal, the rule would achieve significant CO2 emission reductions from the power sector. We would expect approximately 30% reductions in emission levels from the 2005 levels. It would also have co-benefits. It would reduce emissions of other pollutants that we know cause significant health effects, and that's sulfur dioxide emissions, nitrogen oxide emissions, and particulate matter emissions, and all of these are going to also be reduced as a result of this proposal, and those are emissions from the power plants as well. And overall, we project that by the year 2030, the reductions we would get in all those pollutants would result in net climate and health benefits of $48 billion to $82 billion. So even though there are costs associated with the proposal, and those are significant, the benefits far outweigh the costs. Okay, if you turn to slide 5, as I mentioned, in the proposal, we do identify 4 power plants that we think would be affected sources in this proposal. They're the Bonanza Power Plant on Ute tribal lands in Utah, the Four Corners Power Plant on Navajo tribal lands in New Mexico, the Navajo Generating Station on Navajo tribal lands in Arizona, and those 3 are coal-fired power plants. The 4th one, South Point Energy Center on Fort Mojave tribal lands in Arizona. That's a natural gas combined cycle unit.
And the next 2 bullets, so that y'all know, are not in the proposal. This is information that we've generated as we're working on the supplemental proposal. And so we have some indication that there's roughly 45 tribes with some form of renewable energy projects, but that's just based on information that we've gathered anecdotally through interacting with DOE and other of our agency partners. So, you know, that's one area that we would really like to get some information from y'all is, you know, where y'all may be working on renewable energy, and so, you know, may have more interest in participating in the process here. And the same is true, in part, it's even more true for the energy efficiency efforts. You know, we know anecdotally of some of y'all that are doing energy efficiency work, but we don't really have a really good set of information to help us to craft the supplemental proposal for and figure out how y'all want to play in this process when we get through the supplemental.
Right, consistent with what Laura said, we are interested in, and we've been hearing from some tribal representatives that there's interest in getting credit for some of their renewable energy projects in the context of a multi-jurisdictional plan, and there's been a question about whether tribes that do not have affected power plants but do have these renewable energy programs or energy efficiency programs could partner with states and their plans and mutually benefit from that partnership. So on slide 6, we did request several comments that do relate more specifically to either tribes or areas of Indian country. And we requested comments during this 120-day comment period, which began the day of publication, June 18th, and it goes through October 16th. So we requested a comment on whether a tribe would want to participate in a multi-jurisdictional plan with one or more states. Since we presented that specific request for comment, we've been exploring the idea of what a multi-jurisdictional plan could be, including, for example, whether tribes can partner with each other, even if they're not located next to each other. We're also requesting comment on how a federal plan, if EPA were to develop a plan and a tribe developing how a federal plan would work in a multi-jurisdictional approach if it was one of those areas that has an EGU on tribal land. We also requested comment on how we determine on how the best system of emission reduction, the BSER, should be applied when we're setting goals for areas of Indian country. The best system of emission reduction is something we're required under the Clean Air Act to determine in setting the emission guidelines. So that's why that terminology comes from a Clean Air Act requirement. And we do explain it in more detail and all the aspects we can consider in the proposal. And I'm glad to answer questions about that if you have any today. We also asked for comment on sources of data. As Laura mentioned, we were interested in data on not only renewable energy projects and energy efficiency programs, but on data that would help us set those the targets, help us establish the goals for areas of Indian country and take into account those opportunities. In setting the goals that are specific to areas of Indian country, we also intend to base the goals on the collection of power plants located in Indian country. For example, in some areas there's just one power plant that's affected, but in others there's more than one power plant. We would take into account all of the power plants located in a particular area, and we've asked for comment on that. And that's consistent with how we did it for the states.
Okay, I think Christina had some polling questions again.
That's correct. So thank you very much. I'm going to move on to polling question number 3, and this question is, what have been the biggest obstacles that you've encountered in submitting comments? So not necessarily just with this rule, but with other rules in the past. We'd like to know from the participants in today's webinar, what have been some of the biggest obstacles that you've encountered? Okay, closing it out. So looks like lots of folks are commenting on the fact that there's limited staff time available to commit to commenting. Other people are, explaining that there are concerns in terms of how to, or their level of comfort with engaging in the commenting process. Some other folks are commenting on lack of support from tribal leadership. Looks like we have a few folks who are saying not a whole lot of obstacles that they're contending with, and they'd like to go ahead and proceed with commenting. And some folks are saying that there's another sort of obstacle that they're encountering. This question is, would your tribe like to submit comments? I'm actually on this rule, so I'm putting this to the group right now. Feel free to vote. And of course, this is in no way binding. It's more, again, to figure out what NTAA can do with the support of our tribal colleagues and colleagues at EPA to provide support and resources to you all if you're interested in commenting. 28% say yes, in fact, they're interested in submitting comments. Excellent. 22% are not really interested in pursuing comment submission at this point, which is perfectly fine. And it looks like we have a group of folks who are unsure at this point, and hopefully both this webinar and the 2 subsequent webinars that we're going to be hosting through NTAA with the support of OAQPS and other partners will help to flesh that out for you. So with that, I will hide the results and go ahead and let you carry on with the presentation.
So I think Julie Simpson might have had a question. Sorry, we're having a hard time seeing the whole question. There it goes. Could you explain in more detail the multi-jurisdictional options you are seeking comment on?
There's something else too.
Yeah.
Yes, the multi-jurisdictional plans, we've requested comment on what that could look like. The most simple example would be 1 or more states partnering with each other, which is pretty typical and more common. Another option that we're interested in exploring is whether a tribe, one of the tribes would want to partner with one state or another or more states, if that would be beneficial. And we'd love to hear from you all on whether you think that would be beneficial and in what ways, and what we could do to make that, to support that, if that would be beneficial. It could be one aspect we're interested in, and I know Janet McCabe has talked about this. Our acting assistant administrator for the Air Office has said it could be, for example, a state or a tribal area that isn't even connected to another state or tribal area. So it could be that even to the extent that maybe different tribes could partner with each other, or a tribe in one area could partner with a state that's not even located in the same area of the country. We haven't looked carefully at all of those options, but we believe that those kinds of options could be available. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does, but let me just add too that I've heard some tribes also recommend that we consider using the model that was used in the RPO process, because it provided a good opportunity for the states and the tribes to work and plan together. So that's also something that we'd like to hear from y'all, if that's something you would like us to pursue. And I believe we got an edit. What is considered renewable? Wind, solar, hydro, wave, geothermal, nuclear. And that's from Charlie.
In our proposal, all of those are considered renewable energy sources. There are 2 aspects of that question that I'd like to mention. One is that in setting the carbon dioxide goals for the year 2030, we considered certain types of renewable energy that we could identify and include in based on the information we had for the areas that we were looking at. And for the proposal, we were looking at states. We didn't look at U.S. territories or areas of Indian country for the proposal, the first proposal. When we set the goals, we considered potential renewable energy that we were aware of, and I know that included wind, solar, and nuclear, certain nuclear. I'm not sure how much we were able to consider other renewable energy in setting the goals, but if we had more data, which we have asked for from the states, we could refine our goals. In implementing the goals, the states, and I'm only speaking about the states right now because we haven't proposed anything specific to areas of Indian country, but this is very similar to what we would consider. And but I want to be specific about what we proposed. When a state implements their own plan, they can actually use other types of renewable energy in their plans to make up for changes in their use of coal and gas potentially. So they could implement other measures that would be considered renewable and that would result in reductions in CO2 and allow them to meet their goal.
So this, let's take one more question before we finish, go through some more PowerPoints. There's a problem with Tribal Council not including tribal programs in their plans and the goals that affect areas such as air quality impacts. And if the tribe is a coal mining tribe, it becomes more of a priority than to support firing plants. This is defeating our support for clean air. You know, I think that that's something that you know, tribal governments are going to have to weigh very carefully as they consider commenting on, and y'all consider commenting on the proposals. You know, I know that there's economic trade-offs as well as the environmental trade-offs, and there's a lot of priorities. I think our thinking is that that we've tried to provide as much flexibility in how the states and the tribes can plan on participating into the process, and we're trying to maximize that flexibility. So, you know, hearing back from your tribal leaders on how to balance that economic impact with the environmental impacts is going to be something that would be really important for us to hear. So I really ask y'all to think through how the flexibilities might be used to the best benefit for the tribes. So with that, we'll go on through more of the slides.
Now we'll go to slide 7, the SER and state goals.
All right, one moment. There we go. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you. The state goals EPA is setting do not require specific mechanisms that a state would use to reduce carbon pollution. As I mentioned, we set a numeric goal for each state, and that's based on a set of measures that I'll mention in a minute, and it's only certain measures that we considered in setting the goals. When a state creates their own plan, they can use other measures beyond those we considered to meet the goals. So what we've done to set the goals in the proposal.
On the webinar, I'll call you back. Sorry, guys.
So while we use certain measures and consider certain measures in setting the goals, a state could come up with their own separate other types of measures, and we do lay out some examples of those in the proposal. What we do to set the goals is first we determine the best system of emission reduction. We do that based on certain factors that include the technologies that are available and cost and other factors. Once we established that, we applied that to each state. We did something a little different too in this proposal, in that we put together what we call 4 building blocks of types of measures, and considering the best and coming up with the best system of emission reduction for power plants. We took into consideration the fact that the power sector is really unique and interconnected, and determined that these 4 types of measures should all be taken into account in coming up with a very cost-effective way to get significant reductions, which is our goal with regard to these emission guidelines. And cost-effective is an important aspect. We wanted to do something that wouldn't affect the reliability of our electric systems, that wouldn't be excessively expensive for consumers of electricity. So finding that balance was tricky, and what we did is we proposed a set of 4 building blocks that together form the best system of emission reduction for power plants for getting CO2 reductions. And they're listed here on this page. We start with the first one being reductions in CO2 emissions directly at coal plants. One of the main measures we consider was heat rate improvements at coal-fired power plants. The next building block 2 is increased use of high-efficiency natural gas combined cycle units. In this case, it could mean for coal-fired power plants, it would mean using redispatch to gas-fired power plants as a way to get reductions in CO2 emissions. Building block 3 is focused on generating electricity from lower or zero emitting facilities. This is where renewable energy would come into play, and some nuclear energy could come into play. And then the 4th building block is demand-side energy efficiency programs. And that's all about, the focus there is avoiding the need for power and electricity by reducing demand. So we have quite a few questions for your consideration. These are just a few on the next slide, slide 8. We're interested in your thoughts about which building blocks should apply when we're setting goals for areas of Indian country. We have started to examine that in developing the supplemental proposal, and are interested in your thoughts about which building blocks should apply and which, if there are any that shouldn't, whether they shouldn't. We also are trying, as I mentioned, to gather as much data as possible on the different types of options that one would have to get reductions at the power plants that are located in Indian country, and how to use those when we're determining the VSER and the goals. And as I mentioned earlier, we've heard from some tribes that they're interested in participating in the programs even if they don't have an effective EGU. We're interested on whether you agree with that idea and how we might implement it, and whether you have recommendations on how we might best do that. We're also interested in whether there are other issues that we haven't specifically asked about or heard from representatives about that we should be aware of.
No, I was just checking.
Okay, so on the next slide, slide 9, next steps, what we've been working on in the past, over the summer, and we're working on towards the fall, is the work of gathering data and information to put together a supplemental proposal where we propose goals for areas of Indian country with affected EGUs, and as well as U.S. territories. So any information you have to provide, even at this point, would be something we'd like to consider. When we do go out with a supplemental proposal, we'll have a separate additional comment period for that. So we'll really would appreciate any help and comments you could provide now and through that time. So again, we've got this current proposal we'd like you to comment on, and then this supplemental proposal, which will be much more specific to areas of Indian country. We do intend to pull all of that information, including the work on the tribal areas, into one final rulemaking, and we've been tasked with the job of meeting that deadline by June 1st of 2015. Okay, so if EPA determines, specific to the tribes, if EPA determines that a plan is necessary or appropriate after we establish these goals for Indian country, we have the responsibility to establish the plans. Unless the tribe on whose lands those areas, those power plants reside, seeks and obtains authority under the Tribal Authority Rule, as you all know. If the tribe does seek or obtain authority to establish the plan itself, EPA intends that the tribe would have a lot of flexibility, similar to that of the states, to develop a plan that's tailored to its specific circumstances. So we recognize that every area has different interests and needs and opportunities, and those plans would be something that would have, you'd have a lot of flexibility in terms of determining how you want, what kind of approach you want to take to meet the goal by 2030. On the last slide, we have our schedule, which I covered to a great extent. We published the proposal for the Clean Power Plan on June 18th. Our comment period ends October 16th. There are many ways to comment. Sending an email, it's as simple as sending an email. And any comments you have would be of use to us and appreciated. We plan to issue a supplemental proposal in October. And again, we would request comment, there would be a comment period for that, followed by the June 1st final rulemaking on all of these areas.
Just before we open the floor, I did want to just say that there's, you know, these are the questions that we've teed up are the ones that we can think of. I know that y'all may have a different set of concerns. I know, like, if I've heard some of the Region 5 tribes express concern about cumulative impacts from multiple power plants in their area and how they can participate in the planning process, to some of the tribes that have coal mines and affected sources and the impacts on the economy. So, you know, what we'd like to hear from y'all are not only responses to the questions that we thought of, but also what are the other issues that you guys are worried about, or that you have questions about, or input that we need to be aware of as we're moving forward with the supplemental proposal. So Christine, I don't know if you want to just answer questions that get typed in, or are you going to open the floor? How do you want to work the interaction?
Sure. So thank you both so much for the presentation and for taking time today to discuss the Clean Power Plan in detail. I will open up the Q&A session. If you have a question, if you could just use the raise your hand function on GoToWebinar, or go ahead and type questions into the question box. The only reason that we're trying to limit the number of people that have access to audio at any given time is to reduce any kind of unpleasant audio feedback. But we do strongly encourage you to ask questions if you have any at this point. And while we're waiting for some questions to be queued up, I will go ahead and just pull up the webpage that has both the Clean Power Plan's sort of homepage that was generated by EPA, just for your information. So here is the webpage itself, and as you can see, there's a link here to the proposed rule, which you can access here on the Federal Register site. And one last thing I did want to mention is that NTAA will be generating policy response kits in response to the proposed rule, which you can find. This is the NTAA homepage. You can find those policy response kits under the Resources tab, and then you go to Current US EPA Actions, and a policy response kit should be published to that site very soon. We will be providing fact sheets that outline some of the climate impacts in the regions, broken down into EPA regions throughout the country. It also provides contact info for your regional tribal air coordinator, as well as your executive committee representative for your designated region, and a variety of other information on the actual rule itself. We'll be providing template letters for tribes to comment. NTA will also be submitting a comment letter to EPA on the rule. And I think for now that's it on our end. Are there any questions from the participants? I will mention, hopefully you all have seen, there will be two subsequent webinars that we'll be hosting in the coming weeks, one in early September and one in late September. The next webinar will dig into some of the meat and potatoes of the comments, what's being asked by EPA for the public and agencies to comment on, as well as what comments NTA will likely be submitting. We'll have a couple of our policy advisory committee members on that webinar, as well as a handful of panelists that will be discussing, again, the specific comments in greater detail. Doesn't appear that we have any questions. Oh, here we go. Here's one question. So this question is from Charlie, and the question is, in a MGAO setting, would US EPA, and actually, you know what, Charlie, I don't know if you're interested, but I can actually unmute you. We'll try to unmute you and see if you'd like to chime in. Charlie, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. In a multi-jurisdictional organization setting, I realize this could be several tribes or even tribes and states. Would EPA envision tribes would work closely, in this case states, that have EGUs near Indian country or within the tribe's traditional use area, or previously the territory with use of rights area, and through the NJA process, minimize the impacts onto the areas that are of the tribal interest, even though it may be off Indian country?
Yeah, Charlie, I think that's a really good question, and I think it's one that we haven't really grappled with too much. I think in the current discussions, we're thinking more in the line of, who's a generator and who can the tribe provide either wind or solar resources to offset the generation of coal or something to that effect. But I think this is a perspective that is really important for EPA to hear, that there's other reasons the tribes should have a seat at the multi-jurisdictional planning level, even if they've not got a current renewable energy source, because of the impacts of carbon and some of the co-benefit pollutants on things that are important to the tribe, whether it's air quality, whether it's an impact on subsistence resources or anything like that. So I think that's a really important perspective for us to hear from y'all. That was one of the values that the RPOs provided, was that seat at the table, and I know that's why some of the tribes have already mentioned that to us, but it'd be really great for us to better understand that perspective, and so we encourage you to help us to figure out ways that we can really bring your voice to the table.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from the group right now? Okay, it doesn't appear that we have any in the moment. I did want to mention, if you have any follow-up questions after the webinar, after you've had some time to sort of think over what information was presented by Laura and Amy, please do feel free to either email Andy Bessler, who's the program director for NTAA, or myself, Christina Gonzalez, or obviously Laura and Amy. I'm go ahead and volunteer you both. I'm sure that you'd be happy to respond directly to emails. And
sure. Yes.
Thank you so much. I do want to go ahead and remind you that if you're interested in submitting comments and you'd like some additional technical support, please go ahead and contact NTAA, or again, feel free to contact Amy or Laura. But do know that NTAA will be distributing soon a policy response kit that will include a template letter and some basic facts on the proposed rule. And of course, we will be hosting the 2 upcoming webinars that are, again, going to dive into greater detail on the specific comments that will be submitted, both by NTAA and the comments that are being requested by EPA in the form of specific elements of the rule in question. Andy, would you like to chime in at all? I think Andy's muted. All right, well, again, if anybody has any questions after the fact, looks like we have one more, and then I'll go ahead and close it out. Charlie, you are still, I believe, unmuted, so feel free to ask your question if you'd like.
Thank you. I would also like to know, how would this proposal affect the power generation on Indian country from those who use biomass and biodiesel?
In the current proposal, we identify biomass-derived fuels as something that we didn't consider that in developing the best system of emission reduction based goals. We do recognize that in some parts of the country that would be a possible measure that a state or a tribal group would want to choose, and so we acknowledge it in the proposal. It's not a specific proposed measure, but it's something that we recognize as one of many measures that an area might choose.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to say, before we close it up for questions, I just want to remind folks that the upcoming webinars in this series will start to go into greater detail regarding the building blocks of this proposal, and we'll be hopefully getting some of these answers in terms of the multi-jurisdictional issues and renewable energy and energy efficiency issues to this rule. So I hope you can join us in the upcoming webinars. It should be good, and we'll have some great speakers as well. So I encourage folks to put them on their calendars and join us. So that's all I wanted to say, Christina.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, that's really helpful. And I do want to take another moment to, again, thank our speakers and encourage folks, if you have any questions following the webinar, go ahead and reach out to us at NTAA or feel free to reach out to Amy or Laura. And we do hope that you'll join us on the next webinar. And thank you for your time. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, guys.